Call this meeting to order. This is the Tuesday, July 20th, 2021, regular meeting of the Livingston Parish Ordinance Committee. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Harris?
Here.
Mr. Talbert?
Here.
Mr. King is absent, and Mr. Grillingham.
Here. All right. Could I ask everyone to please silence your phones if you have them. Item 2, new business, review and discussion recommendations of ordinances. A, zoning introduction of definitions. Mr. Eddie?
Eddie Idell with Alvin Fairman Associates. As you guys know, we've been working on the draft for the first Livingston Parish zoning ordinance for a few months now. We've gotten some input back from some of you guys, and we've incorporated that into the latest version. And we still want some input from you guys as y'all have time to go through the ordinance. Or if you want to come by the office and go through it in more detail, feel free to give me a call and we'll set that up. I think one thing to keep in mind is that I do expect that we will have changes in this document even as we go through and prepare the map. You know, we're going to see something that you guys agree that you want to change, add, delete, and we'll be making those adjustments as we go through and start developing the zoning map for Livingston Parish. So, with that in mind, if you guys have any questions, ask. If not, I'll let you move on.
We've discussed it in great detail. I absolutely agree that there's going to be changes, and there should be, and there will be continually from this point, from that point forward, month to month, year to year. It's not meant to be a static document. It's not to change with things. And in a lot of cases, things pop up that no one thinks about, and you can get these inspirations from the weirdest places. I've had people just say, well, "What about this?" I'm like, I didn't think about that. But
you know, one thing that will certainly change is, micro breweries. That was never listed in a zoning ordinance as an allowed or disallowed land use.
Yeah.
Business type. So it's things like that is going to continue to develop over the next few months. I mean, Dallas and I look at it twice a week, and we find things that are different enough and important enough to where they probably should be called out in that list. So that's something that I expect to change as much as anything else over the next few months.
Yeah, something specific enough to not be covered wholly under as a sitting definition.
Right, like a restaurant is a
Yeah.
restaurant, but some things don't really fit that mold.
Yeah.
Do we have a definition of a PUD or mixed use
We do.
in here? So we address them. Where
Yes,
are
sir.
those, just out of curiosity?
It's at the bottom of a page right after mobile homes.
I just know that's the way things are moving, and I just wanted to.
Bottom of page 6 is where it starts, Mr. Gary.
Mixed use residential, commercial.
Yeah. And then a few pages back, you have
Planned
planned
urban.
downtown development,
Yeah, okay.
small neighborhood business.
So let me ask you another question, Eddie, while we're talking about this. Have we looked at no, you got to grab one open. I'm sorry.
It's okay. I got it.
Have we looked at in subdivisions, okay, like lot width? Have we talked about putting a mix together on lot size, meaning that if typically, like right now, we have no lot width restrictions. Am I correct in that?
Correct.
Okay, so have we looked at in this document somehow maybe addressing a percentage mix, that if you're going to have 45-foot lots, then there's a certain percentage of those that have to be that, so that you don't end up with, I guess you might end up with a subdivision with multiple price points in it, so that you don't you know, have a whole development of starter homes, you actually, you know, because typically what we've seen is you end up with, you know, the initial filing of a subdivision might be one size, and then as they get further back, they get smaller. And so I'm wondering if there's some definitive way to start off, you know, putting a mix of lot size in this thing. Is that a possibility to work into this document, or?
Certainly is. What we have now is just the conventional R1 minimum lot widths and square footages, R2, R3, and so on. So we do have lot sizes addressed, but it's really just conventionally the way most people do it. We haven't talked about, and you know, this really doesn't talk about residential development specifically, but it does delineate what the minimum lot sizes are. So if you wanted to even create a zoning category to where it required a diversity of lot sizes, you could certainly do that if that's what you're thinking.
I just know I've looked at some parishes out west, some developers have been working in, and they end up with, they'll do one subdivision with maybe 3 entrances, and they've got a multiple lot situation. You know what I'm talking about? So you don't end up with, you know, 200 45-foot lots. You end up with, you know, maybe one subdivision with 3 different type, you know, deals in it. So you end up with multiple price points and a little more diversity in an area. So
We can specifically do some research and bring back to you guys ways that you could attempt to handle that in the zoning ordinance itself.
just because what you, I mean, I don't know, it just seems to me that, you know, we're building these huge subdivisions with everything shoved on top of each other, and so there might be some incentive in there to create different percentages of lot sizes, and you know, that would encourage developers to look that particular direction. You know, like, kind of like we did on the state lot type thing, you know,
Right.
or the 1 acre deal.
To try to encourage larger
Try to
lots.
encourage, you know, different, a little diversity in the development. I don't know where you would plug it in here, but if you could look at something.
We
like
certainly would.
that. The unclassified. Have we, I know what was kind of talked about. Have we determined is this thing got an actual list of what can be put in unclassified without rezoning that property?
We do have a preliminary list, Gary, and you know, that's one of the things that we've talked about. I do want input from you guys, because this is our preliminary recommendation. You know, we want to have some discussion with y'all about how you feel about that methodology. And you know, like we talked about before, our idea is in the really most rural parts of the parish where it's not appropriate for us to say this is going to be R1, R2, R3, rural agriculture. It just gives them more freedom to have a daycare if someone wants to, something that's really benign and not a conflicting use between typical rural Livingston parish.
I got you. You brought up an interesting comment the other day when we were talking. You talked about convenience stores with and without gas, and then you said something about a truck stop. So I'm just trying to figure out how are we gonna identify, how are we gonna classify what is a convenience store with truck parking, and how are we gonna classify trucks? I mean, I'm just, you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, it's a great point. You know, and a truck stop is one of the things that came to our mind when we were thinking about conflicting uses. You know, living next to or having what's the stores we got? A Best Stop. Having a Best Stop in the neighborhood is not a bad thing. Having a 20-acre truck stop where you got 260 trucks parked, that's a completely different animal.
Yeah, maybe 100 of them idling at night while somebody's sleeping in on, you know, so.
Right. And so, you know, it's some of those things that I believe deserve a lot more continued thought from us on how we're going to handle that. You know, is a truck stop different from a convenience store? I think it is.
Okay, so my question, are we gonna go look at like NAT codes to determine, you know, what something's I mean, so, and I'm not trying to be, I guess what I'm gonna say is that I had a buddy of mine used to have what I refer to as an auto truck stop on Highway 22 at the Sorrento exit, you know, right there on the right.
Yep, I know where you're going.
And, I mean, it was like a 2-acre tract of land, and he had gas out front, he had diesel in the back, but he didn't really have truck parking. You know, there was a couple places for guys to pull around the back and get out of their truck and come in and grab a sandwich or something, you know, and then get back in and leave. But it wasn't a full-blown truck stop, so I just gotta.
Yeah, it's things like that that we will have to put some thought into and develop a good definition.
Okay.
You know, there's gonna be a whole definition section to the ordinance specifically for things like that, so that, you know, we try not to leave a whole bunch to interpretation. Hence the reason for adding more categories, like a microbrewery. Sometimes it's not a restaurant.
Yeah, I mean, the one in Denham the food they serve is out of food trucks. You know, I think
so.
You know what I'm talking about? So I think they rotate food trucks through there, and if you want to eat, then you're going to a truck, you know, to go get your food, so.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that.
No,
It's not a restaurant.
I'm just saying, but that's how you end up,
Yeah, their purpose is to sell beer.
Right.
I mean, let's not cut to the chase there. Their purpose is to sell beer, and you can get something to eat while you're there. They're not a restaurant, per se, in the classic sense. But yeah, you're right. I think there is room for a classification there for that. And that would be one of those classifications. It's going to be hard to put in ahead of time unless it's a business there operating there such. You know, at that point that'll be a rezoning measure to that classification, which also brings a point along to where you could actually change that if something that's unthought of right now comes up.
That's it. You know, at any time,
Yeah.
you come up with an idea of something that, you know, something wants to come into the parish and it doesn't fit any of the definitions or categories we have. Well, you need to think about where you want it and add it.
Yeah.
Like under airports. How do private landing strips that exist, I mean, I've got one in my district, how are those things addressed in? Have we looked at that? I mean,
We're actually doing some work for the Livingston Parish Airport Commission, and they provided to us a week or two ago a draft of an airport zoning designation that we're going through right now that would end up being added. But as far as where else we would allow them, that's a good question.
I mean, they exist. I mean, there's some that
Right.
exist now. We'd have to put them in something. So I'm just trying to figure
Well,
out.
those are just
Like-
runways. They're not actually airports.
No, but I mean,
Yeah,
they're-
private, like agriculture, for sure, you'd want to allow it in agriculture. R1 maybe, R2, R3s, I don't think so.
I got you.
So I know we did place it as an allowed use in agriculture.
Okay.
I don't remember where else we put it at
I
standing.
mean, I don't mean to. It's just a lot of things that when
But
you
like-
start thinking about that.
Like
there's-
Dana has an
Yeah.
airport.
Yeah, I mean, they got
strip
the
up there.
landing strip right
That's
up there.
right.
So I mean, you got to figure out. You got to do something. You got to designate it as some classification.
And you know, and typically the way this works is if it's an existing use, it's going to be grandfathered in.
Oh, I understand, but
But it does make you think about where you want to
Where
allow
you-
it in the future.
right
Mhm.
where you would put it. You know, so
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, so this is, so, I know this is an ongoing developing thing. Eddie, what's your recommendation about this specific document that you gave us today? How would you, what is your vision, or, you know, I know we've got to talk, what is your vision for how this thing should progress?
Like I said earlier, we're going to make changes for the next several months while we're working on the map. If you guys are generally in agreement with the number of categories that we have, generally in agreement with how we have them laid out, and the allowed uses in each one, I know we're going to make changes, but if you are in reasonable agreement, then you guys could authorize us to go ahead and go to the next step, because we're going to use this document to try to figure out how we map the parish as far as zoning is
Okay, so,
concerned.
I guess so that we don't waste time and money. So my question is, if we hand this document out, just make it public, you know what I'm talking about? Every councilman kind of evaluate it, look at it. Is there some wording that we could put at the back of this thing if we adopt it by ordinance that said, this is a roadmap for how mapping and implementation would? And this document is basically not, no, it's not it's adopted, yet it's not something they're bound to until we get to point B or C or whatever in the process.
You could, because it's really, you can't use it till you have a map.
Right.
So you could do that, if you're comfortable enough to adopt it in the form that it's in.
Knowing that it's gonna be modified, that
That's
it's a,
it,
it's a
knowing that
living
there'll be an
document.
amended version within the next 6 months, there would be maybe re-adopted with the first draft of the map.
Because hell, at some point in time, there's gonna be an electric station sitting around where people can pull up, plug in
Correct.
their cars, and we probably hadn't even thought about it. I mean, you know,
That's right.
the world's changing, and so things are gonna be, gonna
Charging
happen that are gonna, I mean, solar farms are becoming a big deal, and so I don't even know if solar farms are addressed in this thing, so.
I don't think we do have it.
But I'm just saying, there are situations where we know some parishes out west, and if you go to Florida right now, you'll be amazed, or ride through Texas, at some of the situations you see on the side of the interstate. So, it's something that's coming that needs to go ahead and be addressed, because I think we've got one, Shane, we've got one in your district currently right now, and I think there's been is there talk of another one somewhere within the parish or something? But anyway, I'm just saying that, those things are coming. So we know that there's gonna be industries that develop that aren't addressed in here, are gonna have to be, figured out at some point in time in the future. Because you can start off with special use, but you can't, leave everything to special use if you know it's something
Yeah,
that's gonna be a repetitive deal.
I agree 100%. As something comes up that, we're gonna see this more and more often, it needs to be added in a designation somewhere where our predecessors are not, trying to figure out where to.
Yeah, well, I
put it.
mean, I'm just saying that the process is not gonna be an overnight process.
No.
So what I don't wanna do is let's say we're 2 years down the road, and then the next group says, oh, we wanna, we're not interested, or we wanna revamp the whole thing, and then all of a sudden, all the work that's been done on maps to that point in time is kinda wasted. I think we gotta typically get to some, feeling that they're comfortable, or we want to see something added, and kind of get a majority and move forward with this particular document. I mean, is there agreement on?
I absolutely agree.
Yeah.
But we said this document will never be complete.
Right, well, I
So,
agree.
you kind of have to go into adopting this knowing that this is not what's going to be when we implement zoning completely.
Right, yeah, there's gonna be some
And
modifications.
even after that, it's always going to be modified and adjusted. So, I mean, I'm happy with the way it is right now moving forward, but I know
I just think
I was
we're,
asking him, what's,
Okay, so y'all want to adopt the zoning in phases, pretty much, steps.
Yes.
So this first one, y'all want to do an ordinance to just adopt the zoning definitions?
that's correct,
That's
yeah.
correct, okay, so.
It's going to be like 2 phases, I think.
yeah, but I mean, we're gonna look, I don't think we're ready to take this particular document tonight and make an ordinance. I think we need to get some feedback on this thing, and maybe have another meeting or two, in looking at it, and then.
So you don't want to put it through but we can put it through for Thursday just for introduction, right? Or do you want to?
Well, I mean, I think we gotta make sure, if we do it for introduction Thursday, we gotta have some wording on the back of this that identifies what the purpose of this is. You know what I'm saying? Because this thing just is a definition, and I guess we could introduce it as a zoning definition, as part of what wherever the zoning code would put it at.
Well, it really is the ordinance itself.
This is the ordinance.
Yeah, it would be.
So-
It lays out all the different categories and what should be allowed and disallowed.
I just think we gotta quantify that this thing is gonna be adopted as ordinance, yet there are other things that have to be attached to it before it becomes.
Yeah, you
Well,
can
that
simply,
could-
say
but
that
you could
it's
put
not
that in there.
enforceable until the mapping is complete and adopted by the parish.
And if we have an issue, we can always introduce it and and then do it again 2 weeks.
We
We can do it 2 weeks.
You know, Sandy, can we introduce it with
Push it.
we can introduce it with a 2-week date, or we can introduce it with a 4-week date, we can introduce it wherever we want it. You know, we can actually introduce it with a public hearing at a later date if we wanted to.
Well, you want to introduce it for a 4-week date?
Yeah, Bubba, you good with introducing this as what how we're gonna move forward with a
Yes.
4-week public hearing thing?
Only bad thing about that is when you introduce it and you change it, every change has to be read when you're adopting it. It comes up for public hearing. Then you have to go to amend all those amendments and then adopt it. So,
But that's gonna happen regardless. I mean,
What I'm saying is that there's gonna be so much public input and so much, you know.
I'll tell you what.
I don't feel like it'll be that heavy on this.
Here's another option, just, if I'm understanding you guys correctly, I think the intent is to move on and start working on the second phase. right?
Absolutely.
So you could consider just, getting a consensus of the council that says, yeah, we believe that this document is in a condition that you can't, and we authorize us to move on to the second phase.
Could we do that by
And then just
resolution?
adopt it all at once, Tracy? I mean, that's just another
We could just do a
option.
resolution to send this forward as the.
authorize them to go to the second step of the process.
What you think? I mean,
I had to think about that. In theory, that sounds good. You know,
come on, Shane.
What you think, Shane?
I'm sorry,
No, I mean, I just wanted him to hold his hand up a little bit longer.
All right, real quick, I've been studying this, and I know y'all have too, and I just want to say you could do it either way you want it. My thought is if you went ahead and introduced it Thursday, and then 2 weeks you adopted it as the definitions, like you say, it's really not enforceable, and you really can't decide what goes where, it's really not effective until you map it. Then, after that, while you're mapping, right, then you could make the modifications, and then you could introduce a new ordinance to modify it with all those changes at one time, and then adopt it that way. And you wouldn't have to actually do amendments, you'd actually be introducing, I guess you could say, modifications to the existing ordinance, right? You
So
can
what
capture
you're
all
saying,
the changes at
so what
once.
you're saying is introduce this one and then adopt it as introduced,
Yeah.
and then knowing that we're gonna modify it later in lieu of trying to modify
And-
this thing in 2 weeks or whatever?
Yeah, you could do it that way. If you wanted to, you can do it either way you want it. All three ways that y'all talked about is good, but I did read through it
Ms.
pretty
Teal.
heavily. And it's pretty,
That's easier.
it's pretty well defined, pretty well
Okay.
classified.
I like that. Thank you, Mr. Mack.
Thanks.
Bubba, you wanna make a motion to introduce this is the order?
yes, I like that motion.
I'll second.
Motion
Wait,
by
you wanna
Mr.
see, we wanna see what that public, I mean,
Anybody from the public want to comment? All right. Motion by Mr. Harris, second by Mr. Talbert. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Good job, gentlemen. Yeah. Thank you. All right, section B, building lines. This is when you, Mr. Talbot?
Well, this is, Morgan basically said the way we originally drafted this ordinance is 65 foot or less shall have a 6 foot, and 65 foot or more shall have a 7 foot. So if you're at 65 foot, are you 6 or are you 7? So what she said is at 65 foot you are 6, and the wording is to change at 65 foot you're 6, and at 66 foot you are 7. Now, I don't know what happens if you're 65.6 or,
You round up.
you know, but ultimately, that was her recommendation, that she has a problem that a 65-foot lot width, you know,
Mhm.
some people, the way the ordinance is written, it could be a 6 or 7 foot setback. So her recommendation was that we go with 65 and 6, 65 and lower 6, and 66 and
Up 7.
is 7. And that's just, it just solves her little wording problem. So I'd like to offer that as a motion.
Yeah.
And I'll second.
And you might want to see if there's
Any discussion from the audience? Okay, motion by, who motioned?
Yeah, I'll make it.
Motion by Mr. Talbot, second by Mr. Harris. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right. C, impact fees. This is something we had discussed it earlier, as it related to new development, Mr. Talbot?
Yeah, this is a new development, impact fee, and it's, I think Mr. Mack had a discussion with that, and Ms. White did a lot of the work on looking at other parishes and doing this. Basically, what it amounts to is that it will apply to all unincorporated areas of the parish, as I understand it, and the funding of these fees will go specifically to revenue drainage districts. And this is a drainage impact fee. This is not a road impact fee or infrastructure type impact fee. This is a fee specifically for the benefit of revenue drainage districts, as a revenue source to improve. Now, there's been talk, and maybe I shouldn't say this, but I'm gonna go ahead and say it, that, there is, currently, we have retention ponds throughout the parish, and they are the responsibility of the HOAs, but there's no given HOA law, ordinance that says you gotta have HOA, and there could be times where you have nobody owning a retention pond.
Which happens.
A lot.
Yes.
And then if there ever needs to be maintenance, then a special assessment would have to be made on this deal. I think, so, if I'm not mistaken, part of the thought process of this is that this impact fee going to the revenue drainage districts
Yeah.
will allow them
To
then
take over
take over those, is it on new development, they would be then responsible for the retention pond? Is that the thought process? And
It is
so-
for me.
And so, there's not like, it's just not like a money grab. There is a reason for the impact fee so that retention ponds would then become the maintenance responsibility of these revenue drainage districts. And
Right.
we currently, the whole parish now has a revenue drainage district. So, this revenue going to the technically unfunded aid would give aid of revenues for us, that they would then be responsible. They might have to use subs initially, it might have to be something that they contract out to get done, if they needed to do it, until they get a revenue source and get their own personnel and equipment. But it would give them the ability to maintain retention ponds within their district if they develop problems. So I think that was the thought process.
Yeah, and I think that's a good process, because we know we have, but this is all new development.
Yeah,
So
this is not,
so all the houses effects have not even been built yet. Like
no
really
plats,
nobody
no
here,
plats have
nothing.
been, no plats have been
So it's-
submitted, nothing.
So moving forward, if a new development comes in, hypothetically, if the impact fee passes, then it would be a fee specifically to the people within that development. Go ahead.
Didn't want to interrupt, but I did want to make a few comments.
Come on.
I talked to Shane a little bit about that stuff too, about the drainage districts maintaining the detention ponds. And I would be careful about that. Here's a for instance, a lot of the detention ponds are used as recreation by the homeowners. Those guys build fences up to the pond bank. They put decks out into the water. And the homeowners are responsible for maintaining the shorelines and, any erosion, they have to maintain that. Just keep in mind that if you would make the whole pond the responsibility of the drainage district, you need a access servitude around the entire pond. 25 feet, 40 foot of bank width, which is gonna take up their whole backyard. They're not gonna be able to put fences and decks out in the water.
But wouldn't we need that now?
Right now, it's not the responsibility of the public to maintain those ponds. Everybody's responsible for their backyard.
But it is responsibility of the HOA, isn't it? Ultimately, if they need to go do some repairs, the HOA's gotta kind of handle that stuff, don't they?
To my knowledge, every homeowner maintains their backyard.
Well,
So,
I get what you're saying.
But
and-
so-
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, you would have just as many people coming and being really upset because they can't utilize their backyard up against the pond because there's a big old maintenance servitude all the way around it.
the other thought process, Eddie, is that I know what's happened in the past with retention ponds. they've been sold as water features, you know what I'm talking about, to enhance technically waterfront lots. But we do know that dry retention has benefit over wet retention. So the thought process is maybe what we need to do is revisit the retention pond situation within the parish and you know,
Encourage dry retention.
encourage dry retention so that you develop you know, you have more holding capacity. You know, technically, I mean, now at some point in time when the bottom gets wet enough, you know, you lose the additional, you know, but
Absorption into those
absorption.
water
But initially, you know, when you've got a dry pond and you start having rain, then you get some additional, I don't know if it's significant or not, but plus you get eliminate the liability issue. I mean, go look at those schools that you know technically Live Oak, they've got that retention pond out front. It's not fenced, and the reason it's not fenced is because it's dry. And so, you know, with dry retention, you eliminate the liability that exists in a wet retention pond that technically is supposed to be fenced, you know, in certain areas. So, I mean, I'm not saying that, I'm not saying that, you know, I think that before you can implement this and say that it's, the retention ponds are part of, you know, the responsibility of these fees, you've got to look at the retention pond ordinance and figure out, do we still want to let it become recreational use, you know, and, or is we just going to make it really what it was designed for, to create holding capacity?
You know, now here's one thing to talk about. A lot of times you'll have a HOA or the people in the subdivision will modify the outfall structures
Oh, we've
so
seen
that they no longer really function as detention. So that is one thing that I think you could consider, make them designate a right of way and potentially dedicate it to the public for public maintenance for the outfall structures. Because that is, you know, that way you've got some policing power over making sure that the pond, it always functions as a detention pond. You have the proper amount of storage, because what they'll do is they'll go plug the outfall, raise the water level 2.5 feet in the pond because it looks a lot better, but now you've lost all your storage capacity. So that's something that would deserve some consideration, but like I said, just be careful about taking the whole pond and the banks and making it the responsibility
I understand,
of the public.
but I guess ultimately we're talking about implementing something that doesn't exist yet. So I think if you let people know, look, this is a retention pond first. It is for recreation and all this secondly. And if they have to come in and take down a fence, then don't put your fence up or make the fence to where you can take it down yourself. I mean, I know that sounds over the top, but you know, ultimately that retention pond is a retention pond. It's not for recreation. That's secondary,
You know,
in my mind. So
you know, we've seen it. You've seen it, that there'll be a natural drain through some piece of property. And they end up building the retention in the natural drain, and somebody else's property ends up running through that
Drain
retention
through.
pond, right? Well, we got 3 foot of feet freeboard is how the pond was designed to make everything function. Well, as development upstream increases, you know what I'm talking about, and that water flow you know, is impacted, that retention pond might need more freeboard, you know, to make things work. But the people who have bought quote unquote waterfront lots are not interested in you lowering, you know, creating more freeboard, because then all of a sudden that waterfront property is usable. That's why I'm thinking that in the future, because of, you know, we've all seen how this thing has evolved, that making those retention ponds recreational in nature create additional problems if they need to be modified at a later date. Because if you bought a piece of property and you think that you're gonna be able to, you know, walk out there and fish at it, or you know, launch your bateau and whatever, or your paddle boat or whatever, you know, and then all of a sudden, you know, at a later date, that pond needs to be lowered 2 or 3 feet, and all of a sudden you can't get to it. You know what I'm talking about? Then you're gonna be mad. I just think that we need to get away from allowing the ponds to be designed as recreational use. I mean, because
And I think that if you did decide to make it the responsibility of the public to maintain it,
That's what you
That's
gotta
what you
do.
would have to do. You really need to remove it from the recreational aspect because you end up sticking it in the corner of the subdivision and you don't have any lots fronting on it. You maybe even require them to put a fence up to keep people out of it. You know, that's kind of the direction that I think that you would need to
Yeah,
go full
I
speed
agree.
ahead if you guys decide to do that.
And doing that would discourage the retention that gets done in current drainage. You know, I mean, you've seen it. I know you've seen it. You've watched it, you know, where, you know, there's a current, you know, drainage ditch and they expand the retention pond around it and then other property flows through that retention pond. I mean, we've seen it at Cadiana, we've seen it at Easterly. I mean, we've seen it, there's subdivisions I know right off the bat that have done it. And, you know, technically you need to go in and modify the pond, but you really can't because it's not your, you know, it's not owned by the parish, it's not the responsibility of the parish.
Right.
And some of it's been because they modified the outfall and some of it's been because, you know, we've gone to a 25-year storm drain and we've done some different things or there's been development that doesn't technically fall under how it affects, you know, like minor resubs and stuff. You start building more and more houses on open land that technically doesn't fall under, you know, having to have a drainage impact study and retention, then you create more water runoff, and then that water runoff that's going through that pond isn't able to go through as quickly, or the pond doesn't have the holding capacity. So I think we got to discourage that in the future, and that would, I think, changing the ordinance with retention, and then making so that the gravity drainage are responsible would solve that. Now, developers aren't going to be happy they're not going to be able to sell those waterfront lots, but
Yeah,
I mean,
I just want you guys to
retention
think about
is-
that part of it.
Retention was the main purpose of it is to control flooding and not to create waterfront property.
That's right.
I agree. So in this ordinance, this impact fees, do you have like specifics down, or this what you're talking about right here, the subdivision without improvements, this much?
This is an example of a fee
Example.
table. If you flip back here, it talked about how much a single-family lot would be, how much a multi-family dwelling would be, how
Oh,
much
I
a
got
mobile
you.
home park pad would be, how much commercial would be per 1,000 square feet.
This is a one-time?
It's a one-time deal, and if you look at the red here, it says when they would be due, upon the signing of the final plat.
Gotcha.
You know, then the
Yeah.
impact fees would be paid as it's set up now, is the way I understand this thing's structured. One,
Yeah, so, something I actually learned today is planning actually, charges fees already for preliminary and final plats. It's like to submit a preliminary subdivision plat, it's $200 plus $10 a lot. So they already collect those fees before the final, so it would just be an additional fee. So they already have a collection mechanism.
so at the final plat, whatever the fee is at the final plat, you would just add this on the final plat at the time of signing.
Okay. Yes.
Molly Burgoyne, if you were to do a one-time fee, would you have a separate account where it goes so it's dedicated to that actual area
I
or
think-
that specific job? Also, if it's a one-time fee, how do you make sure it's enough for the life of, I mean, people live in neighborhoods for 50 years.
Well, if it goes, I think the idea is if it goes to the gravity drainage district, the gravity drainage district is funded separately
Okay.
by another, well, 3 of the 4 are anyway, so they're funded separately
Okay.
by another source of revenue. So they take it on, it's already an established entity that is operating purely for the sake of drainage in that area.
Okay.
So they would just take it on, because right now, they're not being maintained at all because the parish can't, they don't own them.
Right.
And a lot of these subdivisions can't because they haven't been collecting the money themselves or got to do it themselves. But
Right.
Some of these parishes that collect impact fee, do they set up separate accounts or
Yes.
escrows or something like that?
A lot of them have escrow accounts, yeah. I spoke to our, finance director, and her words were ideally these fees would be collected by the planning or permit department and recorded in a newly created revenue account so that I can run the reports and cut checks to the districts on a quarterly basis.
would the gravity drainage district then need to put this money in an escrow account and then utilize these funds when they did specific work on that, or?
I mean, I think it would be easier if the gravity drainage district did it themselves instead of having our finance director, because then it would take longer for her to cut the checks and stuff like that, so, however.
Well, but, okay,
Just real quick while I'm up here, I would like to say that I support everything you're doing here. I think that what you said about this discouraging waterfront property is a great idea, that the primary function should be retention. I also think that there should be a revisiting of dry retention being encouraged, whether that's through another ordinance or through this ordinance, but I think that that should be done. Also, I don't understand the legal ramifications of it, but it seems like there should also be something revisited about taking over defunct retention ponds that have not been maintained in any way. Really thought that he was spot on earlier talking about just taking care in those situations, taking control over the structure for maintenance of the water levels to keep that. That was a great idea.
as I understand it now, that special assessments could be made to the people, like if, let's say there was a subdivision that had a retention pond that needed work, and they didn't have an active HOA. I believe a special assessment could be made at that point in time, put on those lots to do that work. So I'm wondering if a pond, this is just, I don't know the legal question, answer to this, but if there was a pond that there was no active HOA and the district chose to take it over, could an impact fee assessment be assessed on those lots to take over the control of that?
Do they have the power to take?
Well, I mean, you know, I don't know, we'd have to get the attorneys to look at that, but I mean, that's a possibility that through special assessment, you could actually submit the same type of, you know.
The only thing that I know would be similar, Gary, is like if you have
Thank you.
private streets, if 50% plus one of the homeowners petition the parish to pave it, then they sign a document, you go through a process.
He's not picking you up. Why don't you come up here and just speak? He's not getting you in the back.
The only thing that I know would be similar is like a petition paving. If you have private streets in a subdivision that aren't the public's responsibility to maintain, and 50 plus 1% of the residents petition the parish to pave, then there's a legal mechanism to do a special assessment per front foot of lot, and you go in and you pave, and then everybody either pays, or the ones that don't pay, they get a lien put against the property. So there could be a mechanism to do that for a detention pond maintenance.
But then you run into the very issue that you brought up. People are gonna have fencing up, and I can promise you, if they have to tear it down, they're not gonna have to want to pay to put that back up.
Okay, so subdivision with retention. Doesn't a retention pond have a servitude around it already? They don't.
There will be we used to put a servitude through the center, especially if you have a lot of off-site property that you're draining through the pond, so that technically the public has the right to drain through it. But there's currently no servitude around it specifically to allow people to fence all the way to the water and put decks and stuff in there.
I want to ask you another question. We know that there is a impact fee on sewer. The sewer district is basically charging what it costs to replace. I mean, as I understand the assessment, the value is based on if your home's going to use 500 gallons a day and it costs me X number of dollars to build 500 gallons, and that's what we're charging you as the impact fee. Are they putting that in the general fund? It's just a general fund dollar.
It's a special fund.
Oh, it's a special
They put
fund.
it in they track it separately and everything.
So they create basically an escrow account to track those impact fees.
Track all the sewer impact fees.
I mean, I just knew that we were doing impact fees and sewer. And I knew you would know how the accounting on that worked. Okay.
I mean, I'm good on this. You good with the fee structure there?
I mean,
You good with putting it forward, or do you want to put it off another?
In the other discussions that I had, we weren't really ready because there were some questions that we wanted to ask.
Okay, so you want, we can defer it to, we can defer the discussion until.
Yeah, I just think we gotta figure out, you know, I really think we need to address how the accounting on this thing is done. Basically, I'm not talking about from the parish point of view. I mean, the parish got to distribute it, and Jennifer can figure that out. I'm talking about the special accounting, whether we make them create escrow or a special fund to track where those dollars that the Gravity Chambers get, so that they're spent specifically on what they're designed for. If we're gonna say these impact fees are put in place to maintain retention ponds, then we need to be able to track and say that those dollars that come out of the account are used on retention pond maintenance. But to move forward with that, I think Eddie hit some valid points that we've got to modify the retention pond ordinance, and so we can't pass this without addressing the other. I mean,
True enough. You're talking about it as it refers to,
maintenance and that, yeah.
and servitude.
Right, I think we gotta figure that, I think they gotta kinda go hand in hand, not as the same ordinance, but they almost have to be implemented at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do agree. In another, in two separate conversations that I had with citizens that knew about this, you know, they were, do we narrow the focus down to only retention and detention ponds? This impact fee, this impact fee is for every minor subdivision of property, the way this is written.
I think so. If you wanted to do something else, you'd do a separate impact fee.
Oh, okay, so we're selling.
This is a drainage impact fee for every piece of subdivided property in Livingston
So
Parish.
so it's not necessarily subdivision.
So it's not necessarily just subdivisions, I mean, it's, and we can talk about exceptions and stuff like that, that's why this is not done. But if you,
I get what you're saying.
yeah, like, it's not just gonna be for retention detention, so if we earmark those funds for something so specific.
Yeah. In which case,
You gotta change it, you gotta identify it.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah,
I see what you're
I
saying.
got what you're saying, yeah.
In the fact sheet that I did, that was kind of just like one of the.
So this is basically not applicable.
Either you're not gonna charge it if you're gonna assess it for one specific use, or if you wanna make it for drainage improvements, and then it doesn't necessarily, you can tell them they're responsible for the stormwater, but it doesn't necessarily, you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I got you. Okay, well, we can,
Yeah, it
we
looks
can
like
put that
we
off.
understand what you're saying.
Yeah, like, in the fact sheet, it says money generated by the fees can only be used for drainage improvement projects. Impact fee revenue cannot be used to operate parish government, pay salaries, or improve or maintain existing roads, which is just some verbiage from the other ordinance.
Sure.
But it just makes it more transparent, which is another conversation.
okay, so we defer, need a motion to defer.
No,
Yeah, we just
Okay, hang on, I got you. Come on up. So, okay, we'll just.
Brian Clements in Denham Springs. In collecting the impact fees, personally, I thought it'd be a good idea to institute a windfall provision for the unfunded gravity district. Unfunded gravity district has nothing. They don't have shovels, rakes, absolutely nothing. But if for a short time period you gave them a disparate amount of these funds, you could fund them very quickly without negatively impacting the existing drainage districts that have funds. They have facilities, staff, the whole 9 yards. Whereas the unfunded district, they need to have an initial overpayment to get that ball spinning.
I don't disagree on that in the sense of, even if we did in the future do a millage or something to throw it on that, I've always said that there needs to be an initial 2 or 3 year boost to where it's, if not like twice as much or 3 times as much or whatever, twice as much for the first couple of years, in order to get them where they can maybe take out a bond and buy some tractors and some equipment and get some things rolling. In this particular case though, if I'm building something in District 7 and I'm gonna want, and my Gravity 5 district is gonna take it over, they need to get that money. I mean, that's just the way I feel, because you're asking them to take over something and immediately, and it's not like it's an ongoing revenue. It's revenue one time and that's it. So I'm gonna have to respectfully disagree with you.
Well, my viewpoint, if I explain it, and you hear this from the guys that live in the unfunded districts, they shop at Bass Pro, they pay taxes. they get no benefit from it. They buy cars in the larger towns, they don't buy cars in smaller towns. Well, the car sales is what funds District Two.
Well,
So some of these guys,
But-
they
but
have
car-
this
but-
opinion that they deserve
but
some
car-
piece of the pie.
but sales tax on cars goes to where you live, not where you buy. Now, the maintenance on those cars, you know, the shop repairs and parts, definitely you pay. Like if I go buy a car at All Star Ford and Denham, they're figuring, they want to know my address because I'm paying the sales tax based on the rate and where my residence is.
That's correct.
Now, when I take it back to get the oil change or something like that, then I'm paying sales tax to the city of Denham. But ultimately, you know, if people in Albany start buying a bunch of cars and there was sales tax within funding Gravity 8, then that sales tax revenue for those cars would go to that district, not in Denham where they were bought, or not in Baton Rouge where they were bought, or not in Hammond where they were bought. They would go specifically to where the residents, that deal. But yeah, I understand what you're saying. I mean, that they feel like they spend it outside, but this is an impact fee for a particular lot in a particular area, and I think we would have a problem moving those dollars to another area, is all I'm saying. That impact fee is for that specific lot to fund that particular district. I think you'd have a hard time moving those dollars from like Watson and Gravity 2 to Gravity 8, or Walker and Gravity 5 to Gravity 8. I just think I know what you're trying to do, but I think we would run into a serious legal issue with respect to that.
Well, I personally live in a funded district, and so we're the haves. We're not
Oh,
the
I-
have-nots.
I understand.
But I'm
understand.
trying to bear in mind, we
But-
also need to be
but you're-
advocates for those that have not.
Oh, I don't-
But you're also the haves that pay for it.
I mean, I don't disagree. I
So-
don't disagree with what I don't disagree with what you're saying, and I still believe you could have a parish-wide funded district and leave the money within the areas that it's collected, and it would be palatable to the portion of the parish that's already paying taxes, and it would probably that election would pass because the majority of the density of people are already paying that sales tax. I think there's a way to approach that.
I agree
but-
too,
but
and I don't
think-
believe that there shouldn't be a system where, like, if there's a way that we could help move that forward, I'm all for that. Even if it costs me a little more to help Gravity 8, because at the end of the day, their drainage is my drainage.
Right.
Their drainage is my drainage, and
It's gotta go through, I mean, if it starts at 2 or starts
Yep.
at 5, it's gotta get through those other districts before it gets to where it needs to be.
but, you know,
sometimes.
I think
So-
you have to come to the consensus that I understand that their drainage is my drainage, so I understand that. I don't mind having to pay to clear that out, you know,
The
to some
watershed
degree.
approach.
Um,
Something else to bear in mind also is that the funded districts are very populated. And what you're going to see over time is that all of the available spots to create neighborhoods.
No,
where
it's
these fees
happening.
come-
It's not over time, it's
gonna-
happening, yes.
It's going to stop happening here, and it's going to be happening there, and eventually they're going to wind up with all.
Well,
the fees.
the ditches and you know, canals, they still have to be maintained. So, you know, that funding comes up, it's a fee, at least in my district. It comes up for vote like every 15 years, and you know, they've renewed it over time. So it'll still come up, and I still believe that the people of District 5, of Gravity District 5, will vote to renew it because it's actionable. You can see what's being done, you know, and if you think it's not much, then you really need to go look at the districts that aren't funded, or the district that isn't
I'm
funded.
thinking about killing it. in French
And
settlement.
you can look at the canal that runs right by my house. I mean, it's not wide enough, but it's super clean. I'm working on getting it wide. There's one they're all clean, and that's because Gravity 5 is funded. And look, they do a very good job with not that much money when you consider in the area they have to cover. That's why I believe that like Gravity 8 is what 75% of the parish. They're going to really need more than what, as a ratio, what they collect, what we collect for like as a single district. But hey, anything would work. Anything would work. I agree.
There's
I
some
was just advocating to give them a windfall.
Yeah,
Here's the
well,
way
I
to
don't
do it.
disagree, but
Yeah.
I don't disagree, but it's kind of, there are
All that
so
is-
few undedicated dollars within a parish that you can't use dollars that are dedicated to something else to give them a windfall. And so it's a struggle to try to figure out where we're gonna get that money.
Hypothetically, I would agree with what you're asking. If it wasn't true what Gary's saying, and if it was like a reoccurring fee, but it's a one-time fee, and typically it's going to be when people finance the purchase of their home, and they're just going to roll it into that and be done with it, and in that situation, it's going to be like boom, and then forevermore, the district that owns it, you know.
Well, it's an idea I wanted to throw out. Appreciate
I
the
understand.
consideration.
Thank you. All right, so, anybody else?
Sorry, quick question. You said it was a one-time fee, but then you just talked about rolling it into financing. Is this something anytime someone purchases a house in that property, or is it only when the development is set up?
It'd be with the development, but see, so, okay, for example, if you buy it in a subdivision, then the developer, when he gets that final plot, he would pay them all. So you would really never see the fee.
Okay.
However, if you subdivided a lot, you know what I'm talking about, and you went to get a building permit, then you would have to pay that fee, a one-time fee, at that point in time. So depending on what type of piece of property it was, the consumer might actually see the fee and might not see the fee. So that's what he meant by like, so if I do a minor resub, I own an acre and I cut it in half, then when I go build a building permit or something on that acre or whatever it is, I'm gonna be impacted by that. So at that point in time, I would see it probably. I think that's how it's set up, and then I would actually, when I finance my house, that fee would be part of it. But if developer ABC did a 200 lot subdivision, when he gets a final plat, he's gonna pay for all 200 of those, and those are gonna just increase the cost of the lot,
Okay.
and the consumer will never see
Yeah.
the specific fee. It'll just
So
be
it's
a
part of the lot setup, it's not part of the home sale?
right.
Correct.
No, it just-
In that particular case, in
In that-
a subdivision, well, with improvements.
Right.
You have something?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Melissa. I get to work with the Home Builders Association. I've been to the meeting. I've listened to everybody, and I feel like I could always just listen more. We did have a great meeting with Gravity Drainage District 1, kind of talking about these different things based on a recommendation that we have conversations before meetings so we can understand and hear what the concerns are. This is the first time I've been able to see it, so I'm just commenting on what is here. And basically, I would love to talk to you, Lauren, about it. Like, impact fees are usually on new development, so it's supposed to be restricted to what is happening for this development to exist. And so the retention ponds that are in older neighborhoods 100% need the attention. And there are ways to set up funding for the retention ponds in neighborhoods, and that was one of the things we talked about in District 1, and I know that setup is different because they have more financing. But a few things that we did talk about were that it has to be specifically legally used for the new development. So when it's traffic, it's to build out the traffic, and the maintenance of it is a different conversation or a different funding mechanism. We talked about one that is used in Ascension where it is a certain percentage of this district. So those are traffic, but it's a little addition each year, kind of like a tax that they agree to by living in this neighborhood that they're gonna put in for this retention pond. A little bit different than an HOA, because I have heard many comments about the HOA being passed on in different ways. So we're trying to, I guess, address all those conversations because we're all residents too, and we know, and we have retention ponds, we have drainage issues wherever we are, but the new construction is specifically the conversation. So with that, it has to be sustainable. So you pay a $2,500 fee, how much ever fee, it has to be used in that development over to, it's supposed to be used to build it, not maintain it. So the maintenance of it, that is the conversation, and how can we address that in the engineering process. A few things that they put in that we discussed is the servitude and drawing the lines in the initial conversation to make sure that whoever is maintaining it, they can get to it. So and I might not be hitting all the points, but a few things that we discussed tonight are in the discussions we've had, so we'd love to share that or discuss it with this document to make sure that it benefits the residents and everyone is on the same page. but usually it's tacked onto the building permit, not necessarily the overall development. So that, for instance, in Ascension, it's the transportation impact fee. And that is a certain thing each time a permit is pulled.
I just don't have, like, I think in general, I can't, as a parish official,
Yeah,
I can't have faith in the HOAs.
Yeah.
Because the HOAs, they
Okay.
come and go.
yes.
And, you know, you have people just living their lives, and these meetings tend to not happen. They tend to
Yeah.
just not do it, they don't keep it official, the HOA falls apart. And then there's collecting the fees, you know,
Oh, this
then
is
they
maintained
collect
by
those
the
fees. And
parish.
so eventually HOAs, unless it's in a very strict neighborhood that's maintained its integrity, so to speak, over a period of time, they kind of go to the wayside. And then
I've been on the board of an
and
HOA,
the down-
I understand.
And the safety net for every one of those neighborhoods is
Yeah.
the parish. And now we've inherited a retention pond that is, you know, in horrible disarray. We can't actually touch it because we don't own it.
Because
There's
of
no
the
way to access it if you could, because there's no, you know, servitude. And it's just a bad situation. So ultimately, I think I have a problem with assessing the fees here and a perpetual fee. We're talking about houses and neighborhoods that do not exist yet. So, you know, people that will move in
Yeah.
understand that our parish has passed a crossroads, you know, a while back to where, you know, we are a coastal parish. So every time something comes in and develop it affects everybody else that have been here. So, you know, I'm under the opinion that if you want to live here and you're not from here and you want to buy a house, then you have to pay that to keep
Yes.
that water off the residents that live here now and have paid their taxes now and have been here paying their taxes for an untold number of years. I don't have a problem with assessing another fee. As far as collecting it goes, I mean, I absolutely think we should collect it, and it should be accounted for, you know, separately in a separate fund, to where I don't have a problem letting the drainage districts maintaining it. I feel like that's what they do.
Oh,
So,
I'm
yeah.
just saying
I'm
agreeance,
just
yeah.
making points for myself here because,
Okay.
you know.
Okay, sorry.
But I don't have a problem with collecting, you know, doing both, like you're saying they do in Ascension. It's the
Well-
first I've heard where they
It's-
basically a fee up front, and
The impact fee, they're different fees and they're for different purposes, but it's the idea that, yes, people want to move into our community. Let's build them to be sustainable because we know we have to work on others. This is just a model, but we just want to be part of the discussion, just to provide, because the retention ponds are being discussed everywhere,
Yeah.
and we need to find a solution.
well, and I also agree with what I think we had brought up the point earlier
Yeah.
about dry retention. You know, that hasn't been forgotten, by the way. I meant to tell you that before you walked off.
And we discussed the
That's been on the back
efficiency.
burner,
The
and-
efficiency of all of it is what we're discussing, and I apologize, we were
No.
in a smaller meeting, but those points, I probably meant to circulate it up, it was just in the last month.
I mean, yeah.
But it was a great meeting, and it really helped us sit and say, okay, what are the problems, can we solve it? Because the new development is one thing, but it's also about the whole parish, and we understand that.
Yeah.
And so with the impact fee, I just say, let's discuss further to make sure it does what it needs to do legally, and it's actually, it's going to that purpose, because there are gonna be ongoing issues, and what happens when that fund is depleted by that part. So it's just
Well,
sustainability, that's it.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. And the fund, if it's a one-time fee, let's face it, it's going to be depleted.
Yes,
It's going to be, you know.
so how do we,
So, but I believe at that point, the drainage districts are in the best position to help maintain those rather than the parish.
they could, well, the maintenance of it, it's
Because-
whatever works best.
Yeah, and every 15 years you go in front of the vote, you could ask for a little more to make these things happen, you know?
Yeah.
And then that neighborhood, that subdivision would be part of that discussion with their vote. So, you know, it makes it fair across the board. It makes it fair for the people who live here already.
Yes.
Which is my primary concern. It has to be. And then it makes it fair for the people who move here, which they might not know they want to pay that extra, but they don't want their house to flood either. And, you know, and doing nothing is not an option anymore.
Correct.
You know, so, anyway.
Agree, yeah,
I'd like to
so,
say this much. Personally, I like the dry retention pond.
Me too.
Nickens Lake, right there on Boys Club Road, they have dry retention. Water comes up, when it stops all the rain, the water goes back down. They get a lawnmower or tractor, whatever it takes, and go in there and mow the grass.
I don't know if that's necessarily, if that's feasible in a lot of cases, but you could always pump them down. You know, you could get a pump installed, and then you could use the fees to maintain those pumps. You know,
Yeah.
you can have a pump that will pump it. It might always be a pond, but like you said, the freeboard might be 3 foot, but you can pump it down that far,
There's
you
been
know?
discussion about taking existing ponds, because they're recreational facilities in some places, of taking existing ponds, and when you know some rain event's coming, pumping it down.
Yeah.
You know, you get
Right.
the water out early.
Right.
And then when the rain comes, you give that much additional holding capacity before you start taking water and putting it in drainage ditches in the future. So look, there's a lot.
All right, yeah. Yeah, we
Then,
want,
This thing
push this
needs,
on.
this thing needs some work. I mean, she
Yeah.
knows it needs work and so.
We'll continue to talk about this.
And we
can
got
move on.
Grace Creek Elementary School is another example.
Yes.
It's dry retention, and
Finish Mr. Harris.
Oh, go ahead. You can, she said you can finish. Go ahead, you can finish your thought.
the school board require them to put in dry retention. And like I say, they got it, Grace Creek's right there, so it helps. But after a rain, they can open up a valve or whatever and let it drain. They can go in there and do what they have to do.
Yeah.
Mow
Keeps
mow
it
the
from
grass or whatever, you
Keeps
know.
it from getting
Right.
nasty and, what was the word, all thick, muddy, yeah,
Is
sediment.
this finished? Okay.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Hi, Farrah Krausdorfer. Just a thought, so you're discussing this fee as an initial thing. It's part of the building package or whatever, the $200 paid up front per lot. But ponds are a permanent thing in these subdivisions. What if you assessed a fee each time the home's sold to be paid by the home purchaser to collect an additional $200? That way it goes into perpetuity.
Well,
Is that possible?
The fees are actually more than that, but,
Okay.
but
A
I get what you're
reasonable
saying.
amount then.
That's what we're saying, like, to do that fee, and then if you had to, you could do like a fee that was in perpetuity, so where, you know, just a small amount each month that would be collected.
I think that would, my opinion,
I
harder to
absolutely agree.
collect,
I mean-
But when the house sells, you can take it through the financing. I don't know what the legal ramifications there would be, but just as part of purchasing into the subdivision, you have to pay $200 before you can close to the fee of maintaining the maintenance pond. It's one-time fee, just, you know, when you purchase your house, but that would give you money indefinitely to maintain versus just the one time. It was just a thought.
Yeah, I don't know the legality of that, maybe, but maybe.
Perhaps
I mean,
if you
I don't have a
collect
problem
it-
with that either, you know? I mean, we have to do what we can to help.
I don't want it to just fall apart
Yeah.
because the HOA dissolves and there's.
Well, and
you
that's
know,
what's happened.
Right.
And, you know, and that's why I said I have no faith in the HOAs, you know, because we all know they go away eventually.
They do.
And then
If
we're-
they had
it's
one to
us.
start with, so.
it's us, so.
Okay, thank
Okay,
you.
thank you. All right, we're gonna move on to, just gonna, that part, so item D, Carter Plantation Roads.
This is an item requested by the CDD of Carter. Basically, they are private roads, but they are public roads. They are public, traveled by the public, but they're
Right.
private. And as my understanding, the way state law is structured, the sheriff's department can go in and write tickets, but we have to create an ordinance for a particular CDD to authorize that. So, as I understand, the Carter CDD has requested us to do this. This is just a preliminary draft of the ordinance. I
Yeah.
think Ms. Sandy's continuing to work on this. Are you gonna have it finished for Thursday? So what I would like to do is make a recommendation that we introduce the finished version that'll have some legalese changing to make sure it's legal. Basically what it is.
They want to give them the right to write traffic.
It's gonna set
Yeah,
every
write
speed
tickets.
limit at 20 miles an hour within all the roads in the CBD. I think it's gonna, do some stop signs at particular intersections that need to be addressed. And then basically it authorizes the sheriff's department, based on this ordinance and the way state law is structured, to go in and write tickets on a privately owned public road. Is the best way I know to, is the best way I know to put it. So I'd like to recommend that we make a motion that we recommend that we introduce this Thursday night, and Ms. Sandy promises to have a couple little issues, legalese worked out in this ordinance.
I guess as long as we're clear that this is essentially giving the CDD board permission to, we have permission, we're not usurping their power. We're just giving them the power to let the sheriff's department.
The CDD board has asked us.
Okay.
Matter of fact,
We're not going on private property without them asking us to.
There's a current member of the sheriff's office, I remember, that sits on that board, and they did the research, and they basically said, we want the sheriff's office to come in here and enforce our speed limits, but the way state law is structured, we have to have the parish
Okay.
create ordinance. So they
So they requested it from us.
Yeah,
I got you.
we're not just going in and saying we want sheriff's office to go and write tickets. The CDD board has requested this, and so I'm making the motion.
No, second.
All right. I'm good with it. Any discussion from the audience? We got a motion by Mr. Talbot, second by Mr. Harris. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Nope. All right. I don't think we had anything. Item 3, old business. Item 4, other business.
2 weeks from now, we're gonna talk about package units. We're gonna talk about package units, and we're gonna create a standard of review. We have a parish sewer district, and we've seen it grow and be effective. We're gonna ask that all package units on subdivisions be reviewed by the by the sewer district.
Yeah.
And they be built to a standard that the sewer district created. The second thing we're gonna do is we're not gonna allow them to dump package units into retention ponds before they go into the public ditches. That they should meet the standard, the 555 standard, to go into the ditch and not go through retention ponds that people typically might swim in or catch fish in or do paddleboarding in, as it creates right now. So we're gonna talk about those particular issues in a couple of weeks.
Okay.
Sounds good to
Anything
me.
else? All right. Motion to adjourn.
I don't know.
Motion by Mr. Harris,
I will be glad to second that.
second by Mr. Tower. All in favor say aye. Aye.